While Qui-Gon Jinn hunted a Sith Lord across the deserts of Tatooine, and while the Senate tore itself apart over a trade blockade on Naboo, another Jedi Master was quietly beginning to disappear from the Order entirely. He never shows up in the Phantom Menace. His name is never spoken. But behind several of the most important hidden developments connected to that film, Count Dooku was already moving. And by the time the Battle of Naboo was over, he had helped set into motion the war that would destroy the Jedi. Years before Naboo, on the frozen world of Galidraan, Dooku's faith in the Jedi Order took a wound it would never recover from. The Jedi Council sent Dooku to lead a strike force against a group of Mandalorian mercenaries accused of attacking political activists, including women and children, and the Council took the accusation at face value. The accusations had been manipulated from the start. The local governor was working with Death Watch, a violent Mandalorian splinter faction led by a man named Vizsla. And the soldiers the Jedi were sent to destroy were actually the true Mandalorians, largely innocent warriors led by a young man named Jango Fett. Dooku arrived and offered the Mandalorians a chance to surrender peacefully. Jango refused, and the battle began. By the time it was over, 11 Jedi lay dead, and every single true Mandalorian had been killed except for Jango, who was taken prisoner, handed to the governor, and sold into slavery. The Council showed no interest in investigating what had gone wrong, but the conspiracy went further than Death Watch. In Darth Plagueis, the Sith had engineered the battle from the start. Plagueis, the Sith Master who trained Palpatine, had been pulling strings behind the scenes. Death Watch fabricated the evidence and armed the locals, but the broader manipulation, the reason the Jedi were drawn into the conflict at all, traced back to the Sith. After that meeting, Plagueis told Sidious that Dooku warranted close observation. He had no intention of replacing his apprentice yet, but he wondered whether this dissatisfied Jedi Master could one day be turned without ever being formally recruited, perhaps even used to fracture the Order from within. So he began engineering crises, Galidraan being the first, followed by Yinchor and Malastare, each one designed to push Dooku a little further from the Jedi. By the time of Yinchor, Dooku had stopped looking like a Jedi entirely. He swapped the traditional brown robes for tailored tunics, dark cloaks, and the kind of refined clothing you'd expect from a nobleman, not a monk. Palpatine noticed it with every meeting. Dooku looked less like a Jedi Master and more like the aristocrat he would have been on his home world of Sereno, had the Force not taken him as a child. His slightly curved lightsaber hilt looked almost decorative, but Palpatine knew that behind Dooku's mask of arrogant civility, the man was capable of great cruelty. Palpatine, still a senator at this point, had been cultivating a private friendship with Dooku for years, going all the way back to around 52 BBY. The two had first been introduced on Sereno, at the same summit where Plagueis had studied Dooku. Palpatine watched the Jedi Master debate politics with Plagueis and immediately recognized the same thing that his master had, a man whose loyalty to the Jedi was thinner than it looked. As the years passed, and the Republic continued to fracture, the two met regularly in places where they wouldn't be seen. Palpatine never pushed Dooku towards the dark side. He simply listened, validated Dooku's frustrations, and reflected them back with quiet agreement. He became the one person in Dooku's life who seemed to understand his anger without judging it. And Dooku, for his part, began to see Palpatine as a rare thing in the Republic, an honest politician who genuinely cared about the Outer Rim and those the Republic had left behind. He told Palpatine as much, adding that the senator might be the only person capable of bringing the Republic back from the brink. Dooku even convinced himself that Palpatine's political dishonesty served a larger purpose. Not long before the Naboo blockade, another crisis pushed Dooku even further from the Council. Komari Voza, Dooku's second Padawan, had been talented but emotionally unstable. At Galidraan, she fought with a brutality that disturbed even Dooku, almost as if she were trying to impress him through violence. He told the Council she wasn't ready for knighthood. Despite that, Voza later joined a Jedi mission to the planet Baltazar on her own initiative to fight the Bando Gora, a violent cult of abductors and assassins, and the mission ended in disaster. Voza and the others were believed to be killed. Dooku demanded the Council send reinforcements, but Yoda and the rest refused. In a private conversation with Palpatine, Dooku laid it all out. He had turned out to be an ineffective teacher. Qui-Gon had become a solitary rogue. Voza had been swallowed by darkness. He had declined a council seat to devote himself to diplomacy, and the Republic had only gotten worse. Then, he said something Palpatine noted carefully. One man should be able to make a difference if he is powerful enough. During the same period, Dooku told Palpatine that the Jedi Council had become fixated on a prophecy about a chosen one who would bring balance to the Force. Instead of confronting the Republic's decay, they were passively waiting for a savior. Then, he pushed further. The Jedi could fulfill the prophecy on their own if they were willing to use the full power of the Force. Just before the Trade Federation blockaded Naboo, Dooku told Palpatine flatly that if one more Jedi died because of the Republic's laziness and the Council's hesitation, he would leave the temple and never look back. Palpatine, listening from across the table, had been waiting years to hear those words. But Dooku didn't leave because there was still one person keeping him attached to the Order, Qui-Gon Jinn. Not because Qui-Gon was obedient, he was arguably the most disobedient Jedi in the temple, a maverick who defied the Council openly and followed the living Force wherever it led him. But that was exactly why Dooku respected him. Qui-Gon proved that a Jedi could think independently, challenge authority, and still remain on the side of the light. As long as Qui-Gon existed, the Order wasn't beyond saving. Dooku's feelings about Qui-Gon were complicated. He described his former apprentice to Palpatine as rash and contradictory, a man who preached the living Force but chased ancient prophecy. Yet Dooku never stopped tracking Qui-Gon's career. He knew about the missions. He knew about the controversies. He knew that the Council had nearly rejected Qui-Gon's judgment on multiple occasions. In private, Dooku told Palpatine that Qui-Gon was a solitary rogue, but the word rogue was not entirely a criticism. Coming from Dooku, it was something closer to admiration. Qui-Gon was everything Dooku wished the Jedi Order could be: independent, principled, and unafraid. That fragile belief kept the Jedi Master inside the temple walls while Naboo burned. But Dooku's disillusionment was only part of what the Sith were building. Sifo-Dyas, Dooku's closest friend within the Order, had been warning the Council for years that war was coming and that the Jedi were too few to hold the galaxy together. He had confessed his fears to Yoda and others, but they gave all appearances of being unconcerned or simply preoccupied. Meanwhile, at a political gathering on Coruscant, just before the Naboo crisis, Darth Plagueis spotted Sifo-Dyas standing apart from the crowd with a grim expression. Plagueis was operating under his public identity as Mune financier Kiko Damask, and he approached the Jedi Master as though making casual conversation. He told Sifo-Dyas that he shared his concerns about the Republic's future, that civil war was no more than 15 years away, and that the Trade Federation was building up weapons far beyond what anyone publicly knew. He predicted that frustrated star systems would soon begin to break away from the Republic, and that they would need only a charismatic leader to unite them. Then, he made his pitch. Plagueis described a group of gifted cloners on a remote world called Kamino, capable of growing a human army 1 million strong in 10 years. The Republic would never sanction such an army, and neither would the Jedi Council, but it could be done in secret. All Sifo-Dyas had to do was place the Order in the Jedi's name, and Plagueis would fund it through untraceable accounts in Outer Rim banks. The suggestion caught Sifo-Dyas off guard. Going behind the High Council's back was exactly what Plagueis was proposing, and he made no effort to disguise it. Sifo-Dyas asked for time to think. Plagueis walked away and told Palpatine the Jedi would do it. Even if he didn't, Plagueis said, there were ways to place the Order in his name anyway. But Sifo-Dyas wasn't the only Jedi the Sith were pulling information from. During the same stretch of days, Dooku was feeding Palpatine intelligence from inside the Jedi Temple. During the height of the Naboo crisis, the two met at a small, grimy restaurant called Mock's Cheap Eats, near the works on Coruscant. The restaurant catered to factory workers and overlooked the industrial wasteland below. Palpatine had chosen the location intentionally, somewhere neither of them would be recognized. Dooku noted that the Naboo crisis had played remarkably well for Palpatine's political career, and pushed for specifics on what their partnership would actually involve. Palpatine was blunt. Their common goal would be to return the Republic to what it once was by tearing it down. Dooku accepted this and began sharing what he knew from inside the temple. He told Palpatine that Qui-Gon had returned from Tatooine with a boy whose mother claimed he had no father. Qui-Gon believed he was the chosen one of Jedi prophecy, conceived by the Force itself. His name was Anakin Skywalker, and his midichlorian count was beyond anything the Jedi had ever recorded. The Council was already debating whether to test him. Dooku shared the rest almost casually. The boy was only 9 years old, a former slave from Tatooine who had somehow survived long enough to win the Boonta Eve Classic pod race. Then, Dooku added something even more dangerous. On Tatooine, Qui-Gon had crossed paths with a warrior trained in the Force, and by the end of the encounter, he was convinced the man was Sith. Dooku gave all of this to Palpatine freely, believing he was talking to a political ally, a senator he trusted more than most of his fellow Jedi. Across the table, Darth Sidious absorbed every word and gave nothing away. Palpatine relayed the information to Plagueis immediately. The news unsettled the Sith Master deeply. For years, Plagueis had feared that the Force itself might create a being designed to counter the Sith's growing power, and now it appeared that fear had been confirmed. He rushed to 500 Republica, where Queen Amidala's entourage was staying under Palpatine's protection, and used a mind trick on one of the Queen's handmaidens to get close to the boy, desperate to sense his connection to the Force for himself. Within days, the Naboo crisis moved from the Senate floor back to the battlefield. Amidala returned to take her planet back, and the Jedi followed. What happened next broke Dooku for good. Qui-Gon Jinn died on Naboo. He fell to Darth Maul's lightsaber in the plasma refinery complex of Theed, cut down behind a series of energy barriers, while his young apprentice Obi-Wan Kenobi watched helplessly from the other side. With Qui-Gon gone, Dooku no longer had anyone inside the Order he still believed in. Years later, in Labyrinth of Evil, Kenobi would look back on how difficult it must have been for his master to serve under a methodical, demanding teacher like Dooku. He remembered the Count's taunt on Geonosis that Qui-Gon would have joined the Separatist cause. Obi-Wan rejected that claim, but he also couldn't entirely dismiss it. Dooku needed his former apprentice as much as Qui-Gon had ever needed him, not as a student, but as proof that his legacy still meant something. Even before Naboo, Plagueis had already decided what Dooku could become. Unlike Maul, this Jedi would never be content as an assassin or enforcer. He would demand to become a true Sith. The smarter move was to let him leave the Order on his own, become a public voice for the powerless, and eventually rally entire star systems to break away from the Republic, triggering a civil war that would draw the Jedi into the open and grind them down. Plagueis would not live to see any of it. On the night Palpatine was elected Chancellor, the apprentice killed his master in his sleep. In the weeks that followed, Dooku met with the newly elected Supreme Chancellor Palpatine inside an abandoned factory in the works called the Limerge Building. It had once belonged to Higo Damask, and Palpatine claimed it had been deeded to him before Damask died. The Chancellor wore a cowl cloak fastened at the neck with a Sith clasp, supposedly for protection against the acid rain falling outside. Dooku arrived looking nothing like a Jedi. Palpatine asked directly whether Qui-Gon's death had pushed Dooku out of the Order. The former Jedi said that it was part of the reason, but not all of it. He had learned that Komari Voza was alive, not just alive, but leading the Bando Gora. The Padawan the Council abandoned was now running a criminal empire and posed a genuine threat to the Republic. Palpatine congratulated Dooku on Naboo's defeat of the Trade Federation and called it an odd series of events. Dooku agreed and pointed out that the crisis had clearly benefited Palpatine politically. He studied the new Chancellor's face and said something that hovered between a compliment and a warning. Most people sensed that there was much more to Palpatine than met the eye. Several crises of the past decade, he told Palpatine, bore the fingerprint of a deeper intelligence operating behind the scenes. He named Yinshor and Ariadu specifically. He said the Sith warrior who killed Qui-Gon was clearly an apprentice, which meant a Sith master was still out there. From there, he offered to find this hidden Sith himself, not to destroy him, but to learn from him. Dooku admitted openly that he wanted to understand the dark side. Palpatine nearly broke cover. He held back, barely, and simply told Dooku that if this hidden Sith ever came looking for allies, he hoped whatever partnership they form would help restore order to the galaxy. Dooku responded with something even more striking. He told Palpatine for many beings, the Sith were the embodiment of pure evil, but the Jedi Council knew differently. What separated a Sith from a Jedi was simply how each approached the Force. The Jedi Order had placed limits on itself. The Sith had never shied from using the power of the dark side to accomplish their goals. When Palpatine asked directly if Dooku wished to learn the secrets of the dark side, the former Jedi answered honestly. He confessed that he did. Before the meeting ended, Palpatine asked about Sifo-Dyas. Dooku said his old friend had known the departure was coming. In one of their last conversations, Sifo-Dyas had warned Dooku that if he had any plans to stir up trouble, he would be one step ahead of him. Dooku dismissed the comment, but Sifo-Dyas had meant every word. Dooku formally departed the Jedi Order, becoming the 20th Master in recorded history to voluntarily walk away, turning the Lost 19 into the Lost 20. The Council demanded more explanation than he was willing to give. Even Supreme Chancellor Valorum, before his removal from office, had warned Palpatine that Dooku's public criticisms were becoming a problem, that the Council might have to confine him to the temple if he kept escalating. Instead, Dooku made the decision for them. He returned to Sereno and reclaimed his hereditary title as Count. In his conversation with Palpatine, Dooku even floated the idea of adopting a new name altogether, the way Palpatine had retitled himself from his family name. Palpatine replied casually that Count Dooku suited him better than Master Dooku ever had. In the canon novel Dooku Jedi Lost, which places his departure from the Order years earlier than Legends does, his final conversation with Yoda plays out over a hologram. Dooku told the Ancient Master that the Senate had refused to help when his sister begged for aid against invaders, and that the Jedi had likewise refused to act. He asked the Council to respect his decision. Yoda, saddened, told him to keep his lightsaber. For the Jedi Grand Master, a Jedi was more than a name or a title. The hologram cut off, and in his chambers on Coruscant, the ancient Jedi Master simply sighed. While Dooku was severing himself from the Jedi, Sifo-Dyas was building them an army they didn't know about. Haunted by visions of galactic war, Sifo-Dyas secretly placed an order with the Kaminoans for a massive clone army. He did it without the Council's knowledge, using funds Plagueis had routed through untraceable accounts. Sidious discovered the Order and moved to bring it fully under Sith control. As a final test of loyalty for his new would-be apprentice, he ordered Dooku to kill Sifo-Dyas. The friend who had stood beside him for decades, the one person inside the Order who had shared his fears and actually tried to act on them, was now his target. Dooku obeyed and killed Sifo-Dyas himself. He erased all records of Kamino from the Jedi archives, making sure no one would stumble across the clone army for years. With his closest friend dead and the evidence buried, the project was now entirely Sith-controlled. The army would be built in the Jedi's name, but it would serve the Sith's purpose. With his Jedi identity gone and his loyalty proven in blood, Dooku took the Sith name Darth Tyrannus. His first major assignment was to solve two problems at once: eliminate Komari Voza and find a genetic template for the clone army. Voza herself was never the real objective. Tyrannus placed a 5 million credit bounty on her head and let the galaxy's deadliest hunters come to him. But he already had a candidate in mind for the clone template: Jango Fett, the last surviving true Mandalorian, the same man Dooku helped destroy at Galidraan years earlier. Before launching the hunt, Dooku traveled to Concord Dawn, Jango's home world, and researched his past extensively. He already knew the man's strength, survival instinct, and hatred. He was counting on all of it. The same man Dooku had helped destroy at Galidraan had survived slavery, freed himself during a pirate raid on a spice transport, and reclaimed his armor from the governor's trophy room. He tracked Vizsla all the way down to Corellia, rammed a starfighter into the Death Watch command ship, and killed a man who had destroyed his life. With Vizsla dead and the Mandalorians gone, Jango reinvented himself as a bounty hunter. Years later, that same survivor was about to become the foundation of the army that would destroy the Jedi. Jango carved a path across the galaxy. He tracked the Bando Gora's Deathstick network from Coruscant's underworld to Malastare, through the prison on Uvo 4, where he stole a prototype fire spray patrol ship and named it Slave 1, and all the way to Gardula the Hutt's stronghold on Tatooine. Along the way, he teamed up with a shape-shifting bounty hunter named Zam Wesell and left his old Mandalorian rival Montrose to die on the moon of Kolma. At the end of it all, he reached Komari Voza. Jango defeated her, but Tyrannus stood in the shadows and used the Force to choke the life out of his own former Padawan. He stepped forward and offered Jango something worth far more than the bounty: a contract as the genetic template for the Kaminoan clone army. The two sat across from each other with their weapons laid out of reach. Jango called Tyrannus a Jedi and said that he had no reason to trust him. Dooku acknowledged Galidraan and called it a disaster for both their people. Jango then released Karados plague spores from his armor, a toxin native to Concord Dawn that he had been immunized against since childhood, and told Tyrannus he would be dead within the hour unless he got the antidote from Jango's ship, which was rigged to explode if tampered with. Dooku, impressed, used the Force to destroy the plague in his own bloodstream. With both men now satisfied that the other couldn't be easily killed, they negotiated in earnest. Jango accepted on one condition: He wanted a single unaltered clone, not a soldier, but someone to raise as his own, to carry on Jaster Muriel's legacy and the Mandalorian way. Tyrannus was surprised that Jango wanted a son, but Jango corrected him. He wanted an apprentice. Tyrannus agreed without hesitation. That clone would become Boba Fett. By this point, Palpatine had already met young Anakin Skywalker. He had studied the boy carefully in his Senate office, while Obi-Wan stood nearby, unaware. Palpatine saw a touch of his own younger self in Anakin, the need to challenge authority, the gift for hiding emotions, the power no one around him had fully recognized yet. At that moment, he decided that Dooku, for all his talent, would be a placeholder. Anakin was the one Palpatine would eventually claim as his true apprentice, the one destined to carry out the final stage of the grand plan. Obi-Wan would train him. His mother would remain on Tatooine. The Republic would continue decaying around him. Given enough time, the fear and anger would come on their own. By the time the galaxy finished celebrating the liberation of Naboo, the Jedi believed Maul's death had ended the Sith threat. The Senate believed peace had been preserved. Neither realized the war had already begun. Dooku's fall didn't start with him. The Sith who set all of this in motion, who groomed Palpatine, and helped engineer the conditions that would eventually destroy the Jedi Order, was Darth Plagueis. Watch everything he did during the Phantom Menace, or see where Dooku's path leads from Darth Tyrannus to his final moments on the Invisible Hand.